Okay, so it is rolling. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
It's great to see you. I've talked to you for a couple of months now.
Yeah. Well, we haven't talked, have we? We just emailed.
Oh, yeah, I guess that's true.
Well,
That's
I
true.
feel like we've talked because I've watched you and you've watched me. So, it's one of those things where you think you maybe have talked to the person because you've seen them talk and you've
Uh-huh.
been emailing. So it all connects in your head.
True, true, true. And I've seen you numerous times. I've seen you play the director. I've
Yeah.
also in your last couple modern pictures that you've sent me. Um, I love this. You include at the end of the feature some behind the scenes. So
Yeah.
I've also seen you.
Yeah,
Oh,
I wish I could send you some of the Penthouse movies because those were the best budgets I had. They
yeah.
look great, but the stuff I have is so big that I can't, WeTransfer won't handle it. I even tried to put it on a thumb drive and it wouldn't take it because these files are just massive. I
Yeah.
got them from Penthouse. So I don't know how to get those over to you. So I've been sent, the ones I sent you were from smaller companies that the budgets were uh, even medium budgets, not as
Uh-huh.
bad as Scotty Fox and Dick
Yeah.
Hagler and Richard Aldrich and people like that. Their budgets were horrible.
Very true. Very true. Hey, real quick. Well, I guess we're going. Well, the main thing that jumped out at me was something that I watched this morning. And I'd watched the behind the scenes. Actually, I'm gonna introduce you. Even though traditionally I will probably introduce you in front of the green screen, I'm still gonna do it. I'm still gonna do it right now.
Well, you got me in front of a white screen back there that looks
Yeah,
like I'm coming out of heaven.
there. Okay, I'm sitting here with Marc Cushman, or Marc Cashman, or Cash Markman, or Penny Nichols, or Frank Marks, or what's the Bill Dollars.
And sterling pounds.
Sterling pounds. And every single one of those, first and last, all mean money.
Yep, that's why I picked them.
That's so cool. Um, there was a movie that you did called House Arrest that we covered on the show. This is your 11th appearance. This is our first time being blessed by you, but this is your 11th appearance on Squeaky Clean Adult Films. And on the movie House Arrest, I think a Frank Marino picture, I I went into the, I don't know if you've ever seen it. I know you've seen Convenience Store Girls, and well, that's all I know for a fact that you've seen, but there are 11 of them. But
Mhm.
on house arrest, I went in and I did a little number of all your names. And it was on that day that I realized I'm can be slow sometimes. I realized that each one of those had a hint to money, but during house arrest, I realized that both names because you're covering different countries, both names of each name all meant currency.
Oh yeah, yeah. Franc is the French currency, and Frank Marks is German, and Bill dollars, penny nickels,
Yep.
as you said, even cash Mark man. Yeah, it was. Well, I started out doing it for the money. I was a mainstream writer, writing for primetime TV shows and things like that, and we were on strike. And I was offered to come in and script some of these things. So I did it for the money. But then I started loving it because it was fun. I could do anything I wanted to do. They rarely had a premise. They usually just called me up and said, "We need 30 pages and we need it by Tuesday." And so I would find out what the sets were, how big the cast was. I would pitch a couple titles at them, a couple concepts, and they said, "Yeah, sounds good." I'd sit down in 2 days and write one of those 30, 35-page scripts
Uh-huh.
and walk over, hand it to them, and they would give me a big, sweaty palm full of cash. It
That's nice.
was nice.
And you were the first person to ever teach me this. And it has came up once in the last couple months, and I got to act like, oh yeah, I knew that. But you're the one that taught me that they had to be 30 pages to be above board, to be
Yeah.
legitimate.
Yeah, because if you wanted to shoot in Los Angeles County, you needed a permit. And the only way you could get a permit is if you had a script. Because if you didn't have a script and you were paying people to do that sort of thing, that was considered prostitution. But
Yeah.
if you had a script and all those scenes were justified by the plot of the movie, then it was considered acting. And so they brought in mainstream writers like me to give them 30, 35, sometimes 40-page scripts, so they could shoot in LA and not have to go up to San Francisco or out to God knows where. And so that's how it came about. And it turned into a nice gig. My phone was ringing every couple weeks. Somebody needed another script. And then eventually, after Scotty left the country, the companies that he was shooting for invited me to come in and direct. They needed a director. And so I started directing and my own scripts. So I did about 500 scripts for other directors. And then when I started directing, I did about 300 plus for myself.
The numbers are huge. The first time I saw it, I was like, is that a typo? Is that a I actually well, I mean, I guess when it says writer, it's combining the ones that you also wrote for yourself and for other people, but
Yeah.
it's almost 900.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's like that's crazy.
Yeah. And which seems ridiculous. And you think, how do you find time to do all that? But it just took me about 2 days per script. So that 900 scripts would be 1,800 days spread over 25 years. No, not exactly a 40-hour week job. When I was directing, now we would shoot those things, usually 2 movies in 3 days. So we could share the cast, share the sets. But when I was working for companies like Penthouse, we had 2-day productions. So those look a little better.
Uh-huh. Um, I've made right now we're in pre-production of my fourth feature-length film. Um, over I started in 1997, so that's a for me. I feel like that's a small chunk of time. It's over 20 years, almost 30 years.
Mhm.
But I've done a lot of short form. So I've directed music videos, commercials, and just and some television. And I have messed up. I made two shorts that have similar names. The Dialectic Hush Hush about mental telepathy and Drag Strip Courage about these guys at a bar. And drag strip and dialectic, I confuse them all the time.
Ah,
And I've only made 20. I would imagine you confuse things literally almost 900, um, almost
yeah.
400 that you've directed. And so that's your 400 against my 20, and I confuse more than just those two. I've confused numerous things where I'll think like, oh, that was around the time of my second child's birth. Oh no, that was around my daughter's birth, and I don't even know. I don't know how you do
I don't either.
it.
It just
Well, maybe
comes
that's a good
natural.
segue
And
because
and I had pretty good recall for having done that many movies. Now, House Arrest, that doesn't ring a bell, but I did do quite a few scripts for Frank Marino. That was
okay,
right before I started directing. He took over for Scotty, I think. Um, but he didn't, he wasn't that successful at it. So
yeah,
they wanted to get somebody else in there. And they kept telling me, they say, we can tell reading your scripts that you can direct. I said, well, yeah, I went to AFI. So I knew how to direct and I'd made other things outside of this particular industry. Um, but it wasn't until I was married and my wife was complaining that as a writer, I wasn't making enough money. I was making pretty decent money, but she
uh-huh,
wanted me to make more money. And so she said, why do you keep turning down these directing jobs? What do they pay?
yeah.
So So it was a woman who drove me into it. And a
Nice.
lot of people would be surprised how many women ran a lot of these companies. Um, the person I worked for at Vivid was a woman. You had Kelly Holland over at Penthouse. You had just so many. Another one, Avica, was run by a woman, and so forth. So um, it's not the dark industry that a lot of people make it out to be. I saw actresses get hit on all the time when I was doing mainstream, and
Hmm.
I hardly ever saw it when I was doing these kind of movies, because they
Yeah,
come there to get a paycheck. Mhm.
that's cool. I've actually heard that quite a few times on adult film documentaries
Yeah,
where people will dip their toe into mainstream and say how sleazy it is. And this is
yeah,
coming from the adult world.
yeah. Well, there's more stakes. The stakes are higher. There's more money.
Uh-huh.
And so there's a bigger gain. And when there's ever a bigger gain, you've got somebody like Harvey Weinstein who's going to try to get what he wants from people. But when you're doing these things, which are shot in just a couple days and the paychecks aren't that big, you can't do that. Not that I would want to do that anyway. But so I didn't see it. And I watched that interview with Mike Horner the other day, and he said the same thing. He
Yep.
said, I keep hearing about this, and he made 2,000 movies. He said, I never saw it. Yeah,
Yep.
it
Yep.
certainly never happened on my sets. Hmm.
That was interesting, huh? I was doing research on Mike Horner, and it's right next to my Mark research because your two movies touched, and it was so funny to hear him give you high praise. I was like, "Ooh, I'm sending that to Mark."
Well, I loved hiring Mike. I mean, I was writing scripts with him in them before I started directing. Scotty used to hire
Yeah.
Mike a lot, and Jim Enright, and Frank Marino, and all of them. And then I started bringing them out. Him and Randy Spears and Lee Stone and Evan Stone and Kyle Stone, all the Stones.
Yeah.
I'm talking to Sue over here, and you should come get a little closer. I know you don't want to be on the camera, but see, she's a woman who worked in the industry behind the camera, and she still does. She still works
Awesome.
in the penthouse. And but they're not going to hear you if you don't come sit over here. They won't see you. Oh, she doesn't have anything to say. Uh, but they were great actors, and Herschel Savage was another one. So, because I was writing 30 and 35 and 40-page scripts, I needed an actor who could do all that dialogue. And there were some good actresses in the industry too, but it was always safe to load up one of your male actors with most of the dialogue.
Yeah.
And Mike Horner was terrific. If you've seen him in the Star Trek parodies that we did,
Uh-huh.
uh, he's so funny. And Randy Spears is in those playing the Captain Kirk character,
Hmm.
um, and you saw Dick Smothers Jr. As the Maxwell Smart character in Get Smart. And I discovered him. I put him in his first movie,
Oh, really?
and so I'm sure his father didn't like me much. If people don't know, and we're going to be watching Get Lucky, right?
Correct.
Yeah. If people don't know, his father was very famous as one of the two Smothers brothers who had their own couple TV shows in the 1960s and 70s and did comedy records and so forth. And so Dick Jr. Was a chip off the old block, and but he wanted to do these kind of movies, and he's a good actor, and he
He
was perfect.
does he does such a good job in Get Lucky.
The first movie I put him in was called Bad Influence, which was a takeoff on The Graduate, and he played the Dustin Hoffman character, and he was really good. But I kept looking at him thinking, you look a lot like Don Adams. And so I wrote those two Get Smart parodies, Get Lucky and Get Luckier, uh, just to get him to play that part. I said, you look a lot like him. Can you sound like him? And he did that voice. So,
Uh-huh.
okay, perfect. We got to do this.
Okay, that was one of my main questions. This is something that I realized this morning. I've watched it two or three times, but I just kind of glazed over it. In the behind the scenes, the making of Get Lucky, you mention that one day I realized that Smothers looked like Dick. And what is it? What's his name? No, Don. Dick looked like
Don
Don.
Adams.
And
Yeah.
so I wondered, which I guess you've just kind of answered, was this movie reverse engineered just because of the resemblance?
Yes. So I said I noticed he looked that way. Now I was doing parodies all the time.
Hmm.
Of those 900 titles you mentioned, probably a third of them are parodies. And I love doing parodies. So I consider I did a Gilligan's Island parody with Mike Horner playing Gilligan.
Hmm.
I did Nina Hartley played Mrs. Howell. Really, it was a wonderful cast. I did the Star Trek parodies. I did just so many of them. Uh, because as Mike Horner said in that interview I watched the other day, he said the 60s and 70s, the shows that were on TV back then were so distinctive. There was no other show like Get Smart. There was
Uh-huh.
no other show like Hogan's Heroes. There was no other show like The Wild Wild West or Star Trek. They were so unique that the Addams Family, or you could say the Munsters and the Addams Family were a little alike, but they were different. I Dream of Jeannie. Uh, they were so distinctive that they were easy to do parodies on. So when I did the Get Smart parody, I sat down and watched about 10 episodes, you know,
Hmm.
binged.
Yeah.
And so you see all those jokes that were running gags on that show, like the cone of silence, and we called it the whisper of silence, because
Hmm.
whenever Max was in the chief's office and they're talking about something that is very classified, he'd say, "Well, shouldn't we use the cone of silence?" And oh Max, and it doesn't work. Anyway, they always do it. They'd have to shout at each other. So we did all those things. Jaime the robot was from the original show, that character. And you just see the potential of what you can do with those characters. And that's why that Scum agent, which was our version of Chaos, the Scum agent, what was her name? Delilah Death. Can I say
Delilah
Death?
Death.
Yeah. Uh, and she was a bad, bad, bad girl. But when she went into the back room with the robot, she comes out in love with him and he's carrying her. And she says, "Congratulate us, we're getting married." Because she had never been with a man who had such a big heart.
Hmm.
And so the potential's there with these characters to do this kind of stuff.
Very cool.
Now, I think there was some confusion, might be when people watch this. What's Scum up to? What's their evil plan? Well, they're treating undergarments that belong to senators and high up politicians in America. They're treating them to cause the people to, we could say, get overly excited,
Yeah.
and so they basically go out of their minds with love. And
Hmm.
if we have all of our politicians going out of their minds with love, who's going to run the country? So that's their evil, dastardly plan. So our good guy agents have to go and find out what's going on and put a stop to it. And of course, behind it all is Wolfgang, can't think of the last name we gave him, but Tony Tedeschi played him, the scar on his face.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He was wonderful. Tony was so much fun in that part. He was always good. I loved hiring him too. But he just chewed up the scenery with that character.
He sure
So
did.
it
There
was
was
it
a
was a
there
lot
was
of fun.
one time where he switched his eye patch and then did this little fancy touch, like
Yeah.
bloop.
Yeah, he's just wearing it for effect. Obviously,
Correct.
both of his eyes are fine.
Yeah.
And if you're wondering, if anybody's wondering why is all that popcorn in the chief's office, it's because they're watching the video that was made by a surveillance camera of the politician and his wife going crazy. And so they're all eating popcorn as they're doing that. I know you had to snip that out, but we
Uh-huh.
did popcorn. So that's why there's popcorn in that thing.
Yeah, I love Herschel Savage too, and we had to remove him from the whole picture.
I was wondering, I can't even remember what part he played.
He was the senator.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he looks like a politician.
Yeah.
Uh,
But every time it cut to the TV, I couldn't even it was during love times. So there was nothing I could do.
Well, then we'll just say for anybody watching, what they were just watching on that monitor was the politician played by Herschel Savage and his wife. So it's good husband-wife relations. But
Correct.
because of the dastardly influence from the organization Scum, it's taken too far, and they love themselves until they just lose their minds.
Uh-huh.
Did we
Um,
bridge that okay?
yeah, 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 absolutely. What else did we lose from the X version to the PG
Oh,
version?
oh, well, you cut out my favorite scene.
Controlling the robot?
Yes, the robot. They're in the warehouse trying to see if Scum has been using this place. And he's saying if we could just find a clue, that would be Max. And behind them on every crate is a sticker that says Scum. They don't even see that. But the robot takes everything literally. So if he says, search me, the robot starts searching him, or shake a leg, he starts shaking his leg. And these are gags that were on the original TV series.
Mhm.
And and so the robot says to him, he says, do you have to take everything so literally? And he says, well, I do have buttons you can push that will change my personality to your liking. And he says, I've never seen any buttons on you. And he says, well, they're hidden, but I'm allowed to reveal them to a fellow agent. And he drops his pants and he bends over with his back end facing Max. And he says, now, if you'll just insert your arm up to the forearm, you'll
Yeah.
find a series of buttons and you can press them. And I love Dick Smothers' reaction. He just looks at me and he says, thank you. No.
Yeah. And he tries to get him to do it a couple times. He's like, "No, I'm good. I like you the way you are."
So now they know what they missed.
Correct. Was there um was there any kind of confusion with when Delilah Death chose the robot?
Well, as I said, she did it because she'd never been with a man who had such a big heart.
Yeah.
And you can insert a different word for that. So he her heart melted. So she was supposed to, because he even said she eats her lovers, not in a good way. She's like a black widow spider,
Mhm.
and but she comes out. So we're not expecting we're going to see the robot again. Of course, she doesn't know he's a robot, and Wolfgang doesn't know he's a robot. And then they come back out, and he's carrying her, and she says, "Congratulate us, we're going to get married," because she had never been with a man like that before.
Uh-huh.
So we're going to have robots pretty soon too. I just heard that Elon Musk, who you either love or hate right now, it seems in this country, but he says he should have robots on the market in about a year that we can buy and have in our homes.
Oh, wow.
So I guess men like you and me aren't going to have a purpose with our women anymore.
They can just be serviced. Hey, speaking of you and Mike Horner and parodies, there is a documentary I've been looking for years called Shaving Ryan's Privates,
Yeah.
and it is nowhere. I found like five websites that had at least a teaser trailer,
Mhm.
and every link you follow, because I think that was like 2002-ish. It says video not available. So I haven't even seen I haven't even seen one frame of it, but it's an homage. It's a documentary exploring the parody. Was Get Lucky covered in that documentary?
I don't think I've ever seen it.
Oh, so we're in the same boat.
If you ever get a copy, let me see it.
I've I even had a
Have you
younger
asked Mike? Have you asked Mike if he's got it?
no. There's only three names attached to it.
Uh,
One's you and one's Mike Horner, and then there's another gentleman. If you go to the IMDb, there's just three credits. But if you search the title, there is a lot of oh God, what are they called? Like forums. There's a lot of forums of people discussing the documentary. So it's
yeah.
out there and people have seen it. Um, but a lot of those forums, they will show like the trailer. And I was like, get all excited. I click on it and it says video not available. So,
Yeah, I seem to recall they interviewed me for that.
correct.
I don't remember them ever sending me a copy. I don't remember seeing it.
Oh,
But
that's a bummer.
yeah, I would be curious to. But yeah, the parodies were really big in the late 80s and the 90s. That's when we were all doing them. And by the early 2000s, it was kind of hard to get parodies done anymore. I would still do them now and then. But when I was working for companies like Playboy and Penthouse, they wanted more serious stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the parodies tend to be on the humor side of things
Well,
by
that was
nature.
the golden age of adult movie parodies,
Yeah.
starting in the late 70s, late 80s, when I got into it, when I started writing. I don't know if they did many before I came along. And then all the way through into the very early 2000s, as I was probably, my cameramen would tell me when I was directing, they'd come out and a lot of the actors and actresses, and they would say, uh, now that they had met me because I'm directing, but they would say before that, they said 9 out of 10 scripts that they were working with were by me. So everything was Cash Markman.
Uh-huh.
I think there
Um,
must have been a couple other writers out there, but I think I was doing most of it.
the guy doing behind the scenes for Get Lucky asked Crystal Steele, have you ever worked with Cash before? And she just laughs and goes, "Oh yeah, a bunch of times."
Yeah. Well, she was under contract with one of the companies I was shooting for, and that was for Pleasure. So I probably had done some jobs with her at Pleasure. I shot most of the movies for Legends, so I worked with all their contract girls and so forth, Moonlight, and on and on. So yeah, she would. I liked her because she could act, as you could see.
Oh yeah.
Now we were originally we were looking for a brunette because in the old TV show, Agent 99 was played by a brunette, but they had her under contract and wanted me to use her. We thought about putting her in a wig, but she was such a good-looking blonde. We just thought, oh, what the heck? Mhm.
Yeah. There is so much uh, attention to detail from Get Smart to Get Lucky. And one of the things that I was very impressed with was the music. And there's no music credit on the movie.
Yeah, the guy's name was Stan. I'm not going to say his last name because I don't
Did,
remember if he had a pseudonym we used, but his real name was Stan, and he was a music friend of mine, and he did a lot of that. And in the years following that, as my movies got more sophisticated and the budgets got a little bigger, I had a guy named Philip who was doing music, and I write music, and so I would write songs for the movies, title songs and things like that, and
yeah,
have Philip record them. But Stan did quite a few for me. He did another one called Route 69, and I wrote a song for that that was kind of based on the old Route 66 song. And I remember that was Stan. So he did quite a few. I alternated between 3 or 4 different musicians and we would put music in. And so that was the Get Smart March, or in this case, the Get Lucky
the
March.
Get Lucky
So it's
March.
very reminiscent of the song from the TV show, but different notes so you don't get sued. But it's got
Uh-huh.
a marching rhythm because that played as it was going through all those doors that would open and close.
Yeah.
And as you see, we only had 2 of those doors that open and close. And we put the camera on a dolly and had it follow him through those 2 doors, and then he goes into a men's room and down
Uh-huh.
the toilet. In the original series, he goes through 3 or 4, I think 4 different doors and everything, but
Uh,
we didn't quite have that budget.
huh. Well, he does a very good job, and he really sets the tone. I've seen this movie, I think, probably about 11 or 12 times now, but 2 weeks ago, that was the first time I'd ever seen it. And as soon as that starts going up the steps and that theme song, it is like, what? It sets the tone. The attention
Yeah,
to detail. You did a very good job.
yeah. And you notice we even worked a phaser into it because I
Yeah.
had just done a Star Trek parody. So I
Yep.
had the phaser. And I thought, okay, I love the gag where they're threatening each other with squirt guns, which seemed a little silly because we weren't supposed to have real guns in these movies, just like you have rules that you have to follow.
Uh-huh.
Uh, they look down on having actual weapons on the movies. And so I put in where they each pulled out a squirt gun. And and so Wolfgang says to him, he said, "You threaten me with a water pistol?" And he says, "I'm going to squirt you down there and you're going to be embarrassed and people are going to think you wet your pants." And then he pulls out a squirt one and he says it's got Washington, D.C. tap water in it, the most toxic liquid known to mankind. And then finally we worked out the phaser thing.
Uh-huh.
So that was a lot of fun too. So, and that I just came up with that because I had the phaser prop from doing one of those other shows.
Uh-huh. I like that you got to work in some Star Trek into that. Even some like inside jokes, like, what are you gonna last 3 seasons?
And I worked for I wrote for a couple of the Star Trek series. So it was funny. I would do these parodies, and then I would go in to do a pitch meeting at the real Star Treks, and the producer would always ask, not Gene Roddenberry. I pitched to him a couple of times, but the other people, it was like Michael Pence or Pinter or something like that. I remember I went in and we were just doing a schmooze like you and I have just done. And he says, "So what have you been up to? You haven't done any adult movies, have you?" Because they were watching this stuff. They were getting a kick out of it. And I think he was fishing for an invitation to the set. And I should have invited him. I would have gotten more assignments, I think.
Yeah. That's so cool. We have discussed in the early days when the pictures were shot in one day, and
Mhm.
you've told me every once in a while you would get a day and a half and you'd shoot 2 pictures in 3 days. And that was the 80s. And this is 2004. So how many days did you have on Get Lucky?
Day and a half. I think we did both of them together. Get Lucky and the sequel, Get Luckier.
Oh, you shot them at the
So
same time?
I think so. It would have made sense.
Uh-huh.
So we would do that with the Star Trek parodies. We would shoot two of them back to
Okay.
back in three
Well,
days,
yeah.
and because you're building those sets, and it would be you couldn't afford to do that for just one movie.
Uh-huh.
So we would share the sets in both movies, and we share the cast. You got the same characters, the same costumes, and so we did two Get Lucky movies. So I'm assuming that we shot them back to back, and
They were released a year apart from each other, so that would make
yeah,
sense.
yeah, and so we had a day and a half for each, three days of production. And
Oh wow.
they would be 14, 15, 16-hour days. So you just have enough time to go home and sleep, come back and continue. So we worked very hard.
Well, that's even more impressive because we've talked off mic about the days, the day and a halves of the 80s. We're talking about 2004, and I have no idea what the budget was, but by the look of it, as just fandom, as of me just watching your work, it looks m much bigger budget. And so I was thinking it would have been, I was literally saying, thinking you were going to say 4 or 5 days
Yeah.
because the
Well,
production value is just,
yeah, when I started doing movies for Sin City and Wicked and VCA and Penthouse, we would get a couple days. There's one out there you would really enjoy seeing called Who's Killing the Pets? And we had 3 days for that and some nice looking locations and a big cast. So it was always better set decorating, better lighting. You got more time for everything.
uh-huh.
So it looks as good as just about anything that would be on the networks. But these things, when you have to shoot them in a day, like Scotty did, and I had to do a few one-day wonders too. Uh,
Uh-huh.
it was a luxury to have that extra half day and be able to do two movies in 3 days. Some of the ones, Swinging in the Rain was a musical. I remember we had 2 full days for that. Whenever you're doing songs and dancing or special effects or anything else, you need a little more time. Um, but we did two Gilligan's Island parodies. We probably shot those back to back as well.
Hmm.
So it just makes sense to do it that way.
Um, so now I'm thinking,
Also, here's the other reason to do it that way. So if you're going to do Get Lucky and you want to do another one, and you don't do them back to back, what happens if a couple members of your cast aren't available to come back when you want to do the next one?
correct.
When you do a TV series, you've got everybody under contract. You can't do that in this industry.
Uh-huh.
You're not paying them enough money. So that's another reason you want to do two of them back to back. So you're not chasing down the players later,
Correct.
or
Correct.
if they leave the industry or something like that. You asked about price. A one day wonder, 20 grand. A day and a half movie, you got about 30 grand per movie, because you got that extra day in between. A 2 day production would be probably about 30,000 or more. But when I started shooting for companies like Penthouse, what do you think Penthouse paid for Who's Killing the Pets?
That Kelly was in charge, so it was a lot of money.
Probably 100 grand. So then I moved up to $100,000 productions. But I liked doing the cheapies, and I'm not ashamed of the quality and the production quality of something like Get Lucky or the Star Trek parodies. I think we did pretty good for a day and a half of shooting,
I think
uh,
you did too.
on the budgets we had. And so when I saw you running things like Convenience Store Girls, that was a one day wonder shot by another director. And so I kind of cringe when I'm watching it because they would shoot master shots and nothing else.
Yep.
So Scotty would have three, four, or five people there doing dialogue in a bar, and they'd blow lines, and you can't cut master shots. You can't tighten it up. So
Uh-huh.
somebody is not coming up quick with their line because they're thinking, "What's my line?" And they got kind of that deer in headlights look on their face. You can't tighten it if you don't get singles. You got to get coverage. So you
Sure.
get the two shot or the three shot of however many people are talking, and then you get a single of each person as well. So then when you go into editing, you can tighten it up and compress it. And if somebody blows a line, you just say, do it again on a single shot. And you can put all that stuff together. So when I started writing in the late 80s for everybody else, I started in 86, I think, or 87. Um, it was hard for me to watch a lot of those movies because the scenes would just be dead because they weren't cut to